Today I'm going to talk about why it is that you shouldn't watch the news. Welcome to Missing the Mark, where we look for meaning in strange places. I'm Christopher. You shouldn't watch the news, and this is going to be a fairly short video why, but for a fairly straightforward reason, in that news is mostly not in fact news. In the sense of, if you look at what news is primarily, by volume, speculation. There's a very simple reason for this. That is, that if you consider the world makes newsworthy events at whatever pace the world wants to. News that's being sold, that is, which is pretty much all of it, whether you're talking television news or newspapers or what have you, they have a publishing schedule. They have to... I'm going to talk primarily about television just for simplicity's sake. Things I apply sometimes with modifications elsewhere. But they have an hour a day they have to fill talking about news, whether or not the world has actually made anything to talk about. And just ask yourself the very simple question. What are they going to fill the difference with? Well, basically it's going to be speculation. And is it going to be balanced speculation about, half of it being how well things can turn out and half of it being about, what are the possibilities for how badly it can turn out? No. Because they need people to watch. And in consequence, it's all going to be how bad can things turn out, because that is actually interesting. Because, of course, news is intrinsically competing with everything else you could be doing with your time. News is competing with things like taking a nap, reading a book, rereading a really good book. I've read Pride and Prejudice maybe about 20 times now over the years. And, instead of watching the news, I could be rereading it a 21st time. And odds are very good I will be getting a heck of a lot more out of it. So they need, out of Pride and Prejudice, for the 21st time. It's one of those good books where there's always something more to discover in it. But be that as it may, they have the problem. You could be doing any one of these things, and maybe you don't have my taste, maybe you have some other taste, but they literally are competing with watching paint dry, which is an activity you could do instead of watching the news, and which, on most days, is a more profitable activity that you could be doing than watching the news. Profitable in the sense of with benefit to you. So they need to get you to watch this, despite the fact that they basically have nothing to say almost all of the time. And so every now and again they do have something to say. Some country declared war on some other country, or there's a disaster that is happening, whether it be forest fires that are raging or what have you. All of these things tend to be things that, especially in the age of social media, you will hear about from everybody around you before you ever see them on the news. And in any event, they still only have 3 or 4 minutes worth of stuff to say. Even more so in terms of being informed, you can look at the current coronavirus thing. Government agencies give lots of information out presently on their websites. I'm here in the United States, so I look at my county website to see, daily updates in terms of things like number of cases that have been identified of COVID-19, in the county in which I live. I don't really pay too much attention to the state because it's, 400 miles across and I'm on the western side. And so what's going on the eastern side doesn't really affect me very much. So, I just generally pray for everybody, and past that, I don't have any use for that information. And then just sort of generally, for more general information, there's also the CDC.gov, which then has all sorts of information there. And so what does news have to add on top of this? Do they have any sources of information I don't have access to, given that all of the authoritative sources of information, the ones you can, at least halfway trust, are just putting stuff on their websites? And so you can just look at them. And the answer is, well, no. They don't. They don't have additional sources of information. They can do hyperlocal stuff, of course, but the hyperlocal stuff almost never means anything unless you happen to be very directly affected. So if there's a hyperlocal story about the hospital, which is the hospital nearest to you, that could be of some value to you. If it's not about that particular hospital, though, it doesn't really matter because they're all going to be different. And just using that as an example, this is what I'm saying is true both now, but also generally, that the news has very little to offer you. They need you to watch those. They need to try to do things that will get you to watch. Now, by the way, as I may have mentioned before, there's an evolutionary process involved because there's competition in the news, and this isn't iterative process. So I'm not saying these are dishonest people who are making, rubbing their palms together and making Machiavellian calculations about how to manipulate the general public. People who happen to do certain things under these stimuli will tend to do them in a much more honest, believable way, and so they will be the ones that tend to get selected for. And in particular, the people who see small amounts of news and will spend a long time speculating about just how bad things will get are the sort of people who will naturally be interesting in this sort of scenario, because we always sort of have our, metaphorical, antennae up to notice danger coming towards us. It's just a very practical thing. Like if there's some reasonable sense of danger, and one reasonable sense of danger is other people around us are acting as if there is danger nearby, that's a time to like pay extra attention. See, like, well, he's looking as if like maybe there's something dangerous around here, so I should look too. Before the nature of technology, very, very good, very, very practical response. Because if somebody is looking for a wolf or an enemy with a spear or something, odds are reasonably good he's doing that for some reason, and he's right next to you, so this will very much affect you if it affects him. With the nature of broadcast and so on, this ceases to be true. That there is somebody within 1,000 miles of me who is worried about something is not a good reason for me to be worried at all. All the more so when these people are self-selected, well, not so much self-selected, but selected by the environment for being the sort of people who will worry about everything. Because, of course, that's what will tend to get people, that thing that attracts people's attention is the thing that selects for these people. Because somebody whose news broadcast consisted of, well, nothing of any great interest past the people to whom it happened, has happened today, have a good day, see you tomorrow, their news program will not get watched. They will not be a popular news anchor, they will not be a popular news writer, the show in general will fail. They will be out of the industry. People, however, who are naturally by disposition chicken littles, and everything just has them going, oh no, what happens if this happens, and then the person in charge does this terrible thing, and then the person in charge does that terrible thing, and then does this terrible thing, everything's going to go bad, oh no, it's horrible. Well, they are going to get people to watch them. They're going to be interesting. Their news show is going to get far more viewership. There's a special odd thing, at least in the United States, it may have applied to other countries too, for a short period of time, maybe in the range of 1950 into the late 1970s, really, when you had only something like 3 or 4 broadcast television stations, and so you didn't have competition. News was not nearly as there wasn't as much competition, and there was not as much selection for this sort of thing because there wasn't that competition to drive that selection. And also there were just far fewer things to be doing at the time. And there were lots of people, because television, after a long day, you're tired, television has some peculiar qualities to it when, remember, at the time things like VHS tapes and DVDs didn't exist. From between roughly say 1950 to even call it 1980. During that time you don't see those technologies, so there weren't all those other things that also have the effect of you can just sit back and passively be entertained by what's in front of you. Simulated social contact without the effort of there being human beings talking and so on. And so news then was different, and things will never really be like that. Because there was this lack of competition, people were so interested, and things were so broad. In the modern context, where there are tons and tons of news sources competing both with each other and with massive amounts of other things that have many of those ancillary properties, you can just sit back and watch them, because now we have DVDs and Blu-rays, and, well, once again, we don't have VHS tapes much anymore, though technically you could pull them out if you want to. But be that detail as it may, point is there is so much more competition now. The selective pressures are much, much, much higher now than they were at that time in television news. And so newspapers are a little bit different, and you actually see them being a bit different too. Although again, still, there's sort of a high point in a sense in newspapers when they had much less competition for frequent publication, which the internet has very much done away with, again, even in newspapers. And so you see this massive amount of, in the present context, of competition that leads to the selection of people whose natural and honest reactions to news is to spend forever speculating about how bad it is. And to think that this is really, really important, to sit and spend a long time thinking about how bad it is. And you'll see the same thing in news addicts. The people who just continually watch the news will defend to you about how important it is to be informed. And then, I actually did this with a friend. I asked him, okay, 1 year ago, that entire month, 1 year ago, same one we're in. I forget which month we did. So, heck, we're in March now. So just to use this as an example, 1 year ago in March, name me one news story that happened 1 year ago in March that actually has an effect on you today. And he couldn't. Because, of course, there really weren't. And, most of the things that actually do directly affect us tend not to even be in the news. And even when they do, they're not that big. The things that actually really do seriously affect you, like countries going to war, or, pandemic spreading, things like that, they don't happen all that often relative to daily news cycles. So the point is, these people, just like the news addicts, honestly think somehow that they're watching hours of news a day is somehow improving their lives, when from the outside you can obviously see they're just tormenting themselves and making themselves miserable, is it's an honest thing. They're not deceptive. They're not lying. It's not about integrity. Except possibly in a very, very complex sense that, like, being a saint is about integrity. But, that's to say, to live perfectly does require integrity because it requires complete self-examination and complete honesty, and so to not fool yourself about absolutely anything that you're doing, etc., etc. But except in that sense, it's not about integrity, it's about people whose natural reactions happen to be valuable in the environment in which they are in. So basically, Chicken Littles just happen to thrive in this very particular sort of environment where being noisy in these ways attracts a lot of attention, and attracting attention is actually, in this context, good. Or good in the sense of beneficial. That's really, it's a self-perpetuating system. You can then carry this on in an evolutionary sense, which I won't get into in any depth, but just to sort of give you the direction. Who wants to work with somebody who's a Chicken Little? Well, somebody else who also is a Chicken Little, somebody who has that sort of news addiction, are going to be basically the only people who will be able to stand doing all this news stuff for even longer than being on screen. And then who's going to want to work with that sort of personality? Because it's not exactly the same, and so on. So, when you put it all together, don't watch the news. It's basically accidentally designed to make you miserable, because the way making you miserable will keep you glued to it, because it's basically designed to be addictive. Accidentally designed to be addictive, roughly speaking. And so, it's terrible for you. It will wreck your mental health. It will make you miserable. It'll probably also make people around you less happy, because misery loves company, as it were. And so you will tell everybody about your horrible, horrible worries and drag them down too with you. So, in conclusion, if you have to watch news of some kind, look for news sources that give you as summary a news item as possible, so that you can simply, as neutrally as possible, evaluate whether you really actually genuinely need to spend any more time learning about it. Because something like a pandemic which is affecting you, you actually should spend a little bit of time learning about what are the best practices, what you should do within it, and so on. It's very, very rare that comes up. It doesn't take that long to find out things like, well, you should stay at home and minimize contact. And when you do, make sure to wash your hands, use hand sanitizer if you can't wash your hands. Keep some reasonable amount of distance, because, coughs and sneezes especially spread it, breathing to a much lesser degree, etc. Those sort of things. Doesn't take you long to pick that up. Doesn't take you long to figure out how to do things like wash your hands, apply hand sanitizer, and not go out. And so once you've done that additional research, well, then you're done and can go back to doing other activities that don't stress you out constantly, and just observe the things you actually need to. So, keep some feelers out, keep in touch with people who will tell you, who will give you early warnings if something's coming up. Look for incredibly summary things in the most dispassionate way possible that you can find, just to find out if there is more that you need to do. Keep that to a minimum, because stuff just doesn't happen that often, and when it does, everybody will be talking about the stuff that really is going to seriously affect you. Just other than that, stay away from the news, because news will make you miserable. Absolutely miserable. And until next time, may you hit everything you aim at.